FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter.
Well, have we reached the tipping point? $100 trillion worth of debt globally. The U.S. is good at running up debt, but when it comes to really running up debt, the U.S. is a piker. Just look at the People's Republic of China. They really know how to do it. And here to talk about it, Darryl Schoon. He was a guest speaker at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium, which, by the way, video is going to be available probably next week. So just go over to Liberty Mastermind Symposium, libertymastermind.us. You can order those videos right now. Darryl, good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Kerry.
Hey.
You know, you bringing up that 100 trillion debt, the amazing thing about it, that is the total amount of aggregate debt added after 2008, all right? And what people don't realize is this. These times are an emergency times. And the central banks are doing what they are forced to do. They are trying to preserve a system that is in its final days. And what has happened is if they didn't pour in $100 trillion of debt in 2009, we would have had a straight-out replay of the 1930s Great Depression immediately, all right? We would have gone right from where we were in 2008 with the collapse of AIG, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, et cetera, all right, and gone into 1930s redux. But instead, they learned something from that collapse. And so what they did is they used Milton Friedman's palliative. It was basically Friedman and Keynesian. Both of them were believers in paper money, one's from the left, one's from the right. But both of them knew that the system, that once you had a severe default looming, that you had to do is pour in more liquidity to take up what happened. Because money didn't disappear during the 1930s, Kerry. Credit did. That's what blew my mind. I mean, I grew up, I knew the 30s from my father and what it had done. So when I started studying it, the question that came always was in the back of my mind, what happened to the money? I mean, money's money. Well, I found out money's not money. In the banking system, money is just credit and debt in motion. So when the 1930s collapse happened, credit and debt disappeared. Banks wouldn't extend credit no matter how cheap it was, all right? And people couldn't pay their debts back no matter how much they wanted to. So in 2008, the central bankers and the governments knew this, and they've poured in what I call virtual money, because they make it virtually out of a keystroke, of more credit and more debt into the system to keep it going. And that's what they've done. They've kept it going. But it's still, we're not out of the woods. The fire is still burning. They've thrown $100 trillion on it since 2008, and that fire is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is where we are today.
So fire's burning. So you got to wonder what is going to happen next here, Darryl, and when is it going to happen? Because it's like the little Dutch kid with his finger in the dike holding the whole thing up, right?
Yeah, and I made a joke about that with a friend of mine. She's Dutch, by the way. And 2 days ago I said, you're the kid, your finger's in that hole, and the person, they all know how important it is, and then your mother goes, don't wipe your nose, because you're about to pull your finger out, and all hell's about to break loose. The deal is this. We are here. Nobody knows what or when is going to take it over. I just wrote an article, and I said, and I wrote this article in 2007, in my book, 2007, okay, Time of the Vulture. And in it I said, we don't know whether it'll be a sonic boom, the collapse of a over-leveraged investment fund, the failure of a small bank to meet its obligations on a Monday morning, or the collapse of a major Wall Street money bank to trigger the ultimate final collapse. But whatever it is, we know it's coming. So you just asked the question, Kerry, the same question that I had posed back then, because we don't know what it's going to be. But what we do know is the system is vulnerable, more vulnerable than it ever has been before. And it's like a guy when somebody's in intensive care, all right? In his youth, he could have gone through anything, all right, and emerged unscathed. And now it could be something like, a foodborne illness. Something that maybe he could have gotten by with a couple days of diarrhea and the sweats, and he would have made it through. But now that couple of days of diarrhea and the sweats are a killer. So when we're talking about what's it going to be, when's it going to be, we still don't know. Except we do know this: it's a lot closer than it was, and it's a lot bigger than it was, because that $100 trillion hasn't gone away. It's turned into debt. So all that credit they threw into the system to fuel our continued survival has just turned into, it's like the Chinese had a saying, drinking poison to cure thirst. It's fatal what we've done. It did extend the longevity of this faltering system. I mean, Kerry, I started looking at this system back in the 90s, and I knew we were headed for the drink even then. All right, I knew it. I could see it. I knew systemically this thing it was reaching the end point where the amount of aggregate debt was going to be too large for no amount of credit to revive it. All right, I just knew that. And John Exter, he was a central banker. People ought to Google John Exter. He was brilliant, right? Because our ideas of central bankers, who are Ben Bernanke, Alan Greenspan, Janet Yellen, whoever these people are, Richard Fisher, all the people whose names are up there, and they are central bankers and they are doing something. But the most important central banker you don't hear about, and it's because they don't want you to know about him. His name was John Exter. He grew up during the Depression. All right, and at the end of the 1940s, the guy was the guy. He was a professor at MIT, Harvard. Went from there to became vice president of the New York Fed. All right, he was vice president of the Citicorp. So this man was at the very epicenter of the financial system, at the very epicenter. And my friend Antal knew him, and he said, you know why John Exter started believing in gold? And I said, no. He said, because when he was vice president of the New York Fed in the 1950s, he saw all the gold leaving. That's when it started leaving, in the 1950s. But when Nixon shut the window, it wasn't because it was an intellectual exercise. It was because they knew that they had far more dollars outstanding than they ever could redeem. And they're going to have to stop it sometime, and the sooner the better. All right. So he said Exter saw the gold leaving. All right, and that's why he knew that we were headed for the drink. Well, Exter said that he was having an argument with another economist during the 1960s, and it occurred to him during the argument really how serious things were. So what he did was this: in the 1960s, he quietly converted all his holdings to gold-based investments. And now, American citizens couldn't own bullion during that time, but they could own gold coins. And at that time, gold was worth, $32 an ounce. It was a fixed price to keep it stable. So in the 1960s, Exter converted all his holdings into gold, his investments into gold. And Exter was also there when the decision, he was basically not a participant, but he was, around the scene of the crime when it happened. And remember when we were there and Turd Ferguson had showed us that book, Gold Wars by Ferdinand Lips?
Sure.
Okay. In that book, Ferdinand Lips recounts Exter's story of what happened in 1971. And Exter said that there were a number of them gathered, in this big office building. And he said a limousine pulled up and Paul Volcker comes out. All right. These are the guys. These are the central bankers at the center of this deal. All right. And Volcker walks in the room and he asks people, what do they think could happen? Now Exter was highly respected. Volcker at the time was probably in his late 40s, a young whippersnapper. Okay. And Volcker was in his 60s, I think at the time. Not Volcker, I mean Exter, all right? Early 60s probably. And sort of the dean of these people, had tremendous standing and credibility. And Exter said, Volcker looked at him and says, well, what do you recommend, John? And John said, well, I would say raise the price of gold. And Volcker goes, I can't do that politically. All right? And so Exter says, well, if you can't do that, you got to shut that gold window. And what happened is, 1 week later, the gold window was shut. All right? And Exter said that what that did, it cut the link between dollars and gold. And he knew that was the final blow, that the United States would start borrowing, that everybody would start borrowing. That gold was basically a constraint on the amount of money that you could print, and it was off to the races. And so at that time, the next year, Extra retired. He retired. I mean, granted, he was in his early 60s. All right?
Sure.
But everything he had was invested in gold at $35 an ounce. By the end of the decade, gold had moved in the beginning from 32 to $800 an ounce. Now, remember when Turd Ferguson asked, he was giving away prizes at the seminar?
Sure.
And, shirts and stuff like that. And he had a T-shirt. And one of his prizes that he gave out, he said, okay, he said, okay, the next prize will be given for the person who picks the year that the IMF flooded the market with bullion. All right? And I won it. 1975. Yeah. Now, I could have missed it because I wasn't quite sure whether it was 75 or 76. But I knew that the IMF had flooded the market with huge amounts of gold to keep the price of gold from going up. All right, because of my research on it. And so I thought 74, 76, and I went with 75, and I was lucky. I was right, but I was already in the ballpark. Okay,
yeah, we knew it. We knew it happened. I knew it happened as well.
Yes, because what happened when gold started moving up? I mean, the IMF, which holds all this gold for all of a sudden, they're a club, and they knew that gold was a thermometer of systemic distress, and they don't want anybody to worry. Now, why don't they want anybody to worry? Because if you and I worry, we're not going to buy that next house. We may not even buy that car that we're thinking of buying, and we might not even buy that refrigerator that we need. Mm-hmm. We may instead phone up the repairman, hire a spot remover for the rug, and patch the roof rather than sell it and get at the house that we've all been dreaming about. Because it's a confidence game that when we don't feel confident, we won't borrow. Mm-hmm. And if we don't borrow, the banks collapse.
Exactly.
And here we are. We've borrowed to the hilt. People are scared. They're whole. And even when people are scared, they still will borrow because they don't know what else to do. And I understand that. Corporations are not like people. I mean, 14th Amendment may have said they're people. They're not like people.
No.
All right? Corporations aren't people anyway. All right? And these corporations, they're not spending. They have huge, I just saw a study, Kerry, that U.S. corporations are holding offshore, $1.9 trillion.
Oh, yeah. Tons.
Okay, because they don't want it taxed. All right? And that's what Bucky said. He said, this is a scheme in which we've allowed the corporations, he said, all the yearly profits of corporations basically equal the amount of debt that we go into year after year after year. Mm-hmm. Because they've written the laws so they don't pay taxes. All right, the loopholes are for them. Our deductibles for medical and education, they're nothing compared to what these guys are. All right, you and I don't have a lobbyist. We think either the Republicans or the Democrats are our lobbyists. Well, that's how they sell themselves to us. The real lobbyists are the boys who approach whoever we elect and give them enough cash so they can do their next campaign and convince us, hope against hope, that they're going to do what we want them to do. And nothing ever changes. So what's happened is that we're at the end of the game. Everything is breaking down. But my point that I've always said, starting in 2007 when I sort of came out of the gate with my prediction, is that this collapse in the end is a good thing. And I know people can't see it. I know that the slaves on the debt farm are afraid that the plantations are going to go bankrupt and they're not going to get fed tomorrow. I know this is how everybody thinks. But I tell you, the only way you're ever going to get off that debt farm is for the plantation to go into bankruptcy. And it's bankrupt, and we're about there. And all I can tell people is buy silver, buy gold, hold your breath, have faith, and gut it out, and a new world and a better world is going to emerge out of the collapse of this one. Because until this one collapses, we're screwed. We're screwed now. We're just going to be more and more screwed until it's over. That's all there is to it. Mm-hmm. It's not a matter of economics is not rocket science. Economics, modern economics, is credit and debt. That's what it is. But they don't want you to know that. The boys who own this game, who take the vig off the top day in and day out, They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that the money they loaned you, they made up out of thin air based upon the aggregate amount of deposits that you have put in their banks. They don't want you to know that.
Of course.
Because then you're going to go, hey, why should I pay you back when you didn't even loan me real money in the first place? And I've heard people ask me that question. They say, Darryl, if this money is counterfeit anyway, if the debts are just made up out of nothing, then why can't we just call it even? And I said, because they've sold those debts as investments to your pension funds. That's where it's loaded. And, insurance companies and pension funds are basically buy IOUs from the banks, and we depend on those IOUs for our future payouts. Mm-hmm. It's a daisy chain of disaster.
You got that right.
And
it's getting closer and closer, isn't it?
We're getting closer and closer.
Yeah, and how close we are. I mean, even the Chinese are on the edge now, it appears, doesn't it?
Yeah, they had an incredible run at the table.
Yeah.
But it was unsustainable. It's like everything else is unsustainable. And the Chinese don't have much experience at this game of credit and debt. I mean, the way I look at it, Kerry, the people who really had the experience of the game were the British. They're the ones who parlayed credit and debt into a world empire, and they treated the golden goose with respect. I mean, the Brits knew that the only reason that they were running the thing was because of their scam, all right? Yeah. And when they couldn't get any more countries underneath their little empire, they moved the scam over to the United States. The Federal Reserve is basically a carbon copy of the Bank of England. Well, we took it, and we have a whole different attitude than the Brits do. We're Americans. We know no balance. We only know expansion. So we took this Ponzi scheme of theirs and blew it up in 20 years. They put the Fed Reserve into place in 1913. 10 years later, we had the greatest stock market run ever, the Roaring '20s, and 10 years after that, we had a worldwide collapse that we had brought about, all right? So we took it and we blew it up. Well, the Chinese even have less experience than we do at credit and debt. And what we did in 20 years, they've done in 12. And they're going to blow it up even worse.
Sure looks that way, doesn't it?
What goes around comes around.
Yeah, it's coming around a lot faster than anyone thought possible.
We were living on borrowed time and borrowed money, and we never thought tomorrow would come, and it's here. But I want to say is this. Someday, that horrible tomorrow is going to be yesterday, and the day after that is going to be a lot better.
We
just got to get through this.
Yeah, it's just remarkable, the irresponsibility, Darryl, and the belief that tomorrow would never come.
It was a hope. It's like the same kind of hope that Bernie Madoff had.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
I know when he started, when he was a kid, he started, and I think his father-in-law set him up to it. I've looked at his family for a long time, yeah, because the boys who he was working with at the beginning were the ones who got in trouble later. He didn't do anything different. He just managed to parlay it far longer than he ever thought. People who run scams, they know there's going to be a day of reckoning, but their mentality is, screw it. It's a scam. Whatever I get away with.
Maybe I'll be dead by then.
Maybe, exactly. And Madoff almost made it.
Yeah.
And I think Madoff's failing was he started it when he was so much younger.
There you go. You got to time these things out better, Darryl.
Yeah. Well, he couldn't have predicted he was going to have this thing that was so big. But he started when he was in his mid-30s, and it got so stinking big that he didn't die before it fell apart on him.
Yeah, all these people. I know a lot of people who got burned by him.
Oh, Bernie he knew how to make the game work. And his lawyer. This is how the game works. Bernie Madoff's lawyer, Irving something. Irving. I forget Irving's last name, but Bernie's lawyer was formerly the chief SEC enforcement officer for the New York region and the New York Fed. SEC, New York Fed. Not the Fed, but the
qualified.
SEC. Yeah. So whenever Bernie got in trouble, Irving just made a few phone calls, and nothing happened. So the game is fixed. And if we've had a little run of luck at this thing, then we've had a little run of luck of it. So be it. That run of luck is over. The only boys who are still getting a run of luck are the people who still have their assets in stocks, because it's a liquidity-driven rally, all right? And even the insiders are worried. Insiders are selling their stocks at a faster pace than they have for the last 30 years, I think. That's what the data was.
That's what it said. You know what this reminds me of, Darryl? There's a slot machine at the MGM Grand in Vegas that I checked out when we were there during the conference.
Yeah.
And the slot machine hasn't paid off since the MGM was built. It's the oldest slot machine there. And
this is great.
It's got a jackpot of $2.4 million.
Of course.
And rather than people staying away from it, including yours truly,
draws them.
We're lined up like moths to a light, wanting to put our money in there because we believe that it's time for it to pay off. And it should pay off, but the fact is,
it hasn't.
It could go another 20 years.
Now listen. There are two parties to this, okay? The first party A is the MGM.
Right.
All right? It's their slot machine.
And they can't take it out either. By law, they cannot take it out.
No.
And they're advertising
they may never have
it.
to. It may never pay off, okay?
Well, they have to, because the number of people around who can fix a slot machine of that vintage is dwindling. There's probably only one guy left in their maintenance department who probably wants to retire now, and they're saying, no, you cannot retire. You're the only guy left who can fix the thing. You can't leave. How much do we have to pay you?
Okay. What may happen is this. That guy dies, all right?
Then they're sunk.
Now, so one of the guys who put money into that machine is a lawyer, all right? And so he goes and sues the MGM Grand to force the divestment on a class action basis, of which he's the lead litigant.
Yeah.
He's the chief counsel for the litigants, all right? And force them to divulge it.
Isn't America a wonderful place?
Exactly, and it goes to court. All right, but this is not a federal jurisdiction question. It's Nevada.
Yeah, right.
Okay, it's a Nevada court. Okay, so of course the MGM has all the clout. All right, and it goes all the way to the Nevada Supreme Court, and they rule unanimously that because the lack of a payout was not due to intent.
Yeah.
It was due to the death of anybody who could fix the machine, and therefore MGM is as much a victim of circumstance as all the people who put their money in. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, those people who put their money in were never assured of a payout anyway.
But
so their standing
chance of a payout.
Absolutely. So their standing in itself is questionable.
I love it. And then clearly...
And they keep the money, and that's it.
Yeah. And you know
what they do? No, and they put in a new slot machine next to it. One that runs on cyber stuff and can run forever. And then people line up to put the money in that one too. And
the moral of the story is, sorry, suckers, that's the way the system works. Right?
That's right. And you thought by putting your $10 you're going to get a payout of $3 million. Who were you kidding anyway?
But the laws were protecting you. The SEC, the Nevada Gaming Authority, it's the same thing, right?
You see the thing about the German Constitutional Court?
Yeah, they just said the EU is legal.
Oh, yeah. Of course they were always going to say that.
Yeah, well, at this point, it's just like the IRS is legal and, the, what was it, the 16th Amendment, I think it was the 16th Amendment, correct me if I'm wrong, which created the income tax, which supposedly they didn't have identical statutes in all the states where it was passed, so therefore it's not legal. Right, yeah, okay. So we'll just strike down that amendment, and every dollar that was collected in income tax, gets refunded.
Of course you're not going to get it back.
Thing.
But Kerry,
right. Yeah.
You know what the thing that people don't know about the income tax? That law, that amendment? It coincidentally came into being in 1913.
Yeah, of course, to finance.
Because when the bankers knew they were going to debt the government of the United States for every penny it spent, they wanted to be sure they were going to be paid back.
Of course, it's no coincidence.
Absolutely. So they passed the income tax to make sure the bankers would get their VIG.
And then prohibition fits in there with it, because prohibition was the primary, alcohol excise tax is one of the primary sources of revenue for the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It's all
Progressivism, Prohibition, Federal Reserve, and then just so happens World War I starts right after that. I love coincidences, Darryl, don't you?
I heard a great quote on coincidence, and it said, a coincidence is a trend that the mind has chosen to disbelieve.
Yeah, beautiful. And
isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
And coincidence totally is merely a trend that the mind has basically decided not to take seriously.
Yeah, couldn't fit better here, that's for sure.
Yeah, and here we are. So, buy gold, buy silver, have faith, and hope.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That's where we're at.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to. So we got to wrap up, Darryl, but
okay.
Hey, don't forget, go over to libertymastermind.us, order the video because it was.
I want to tell people who are listening to this program, that video was a game changer. That whole thing. If you sit there, it's $120. You didn't have to come. You didn't have to pay for the airfare. You didn't have to sit at a hotel. You didn't have to sit there. But for $120, it's an eye opener.
Yeah, and I think
it's worth it. It's a better deal than even gold and silver, and that's saying a lot.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, and Darryl, your site, we find your writing, where is that?
www.drschoon.com.
All right. And of course, there'll be a link in the show notes to this interview, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. You sign up for the newsletter. It's free. Darryl, we'll talk to you again real soon. Be well.
You too, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.